Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the first monthly meeting of the Greenwich Board of Selectmen. Please rise and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Welcome to the public meeting of the Board of Selectmen. It is not a public hearing. There are copies of the meeting's agenda on the table as you come in. If you wish to follow along on the items on the agenda, we have 2 items under old business today and 1 item under new business, as well as potential appointments and nominations to boards and commissions. Item number 2 on the agenda is approval of minutes from the meeting that occurred on February the 10th. And at this time, I would entertain motion either to approve, amend, correct any element of the agenda or the minutes from that meeting. Are there any changes or corrections to the February 10th meeting minutes? If not, is there a motion to approve those minutes as presented?
So moved.
Seconded.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Item number 3 on the agenda is first selectmen updates. And the first matter that I wish to raise today is not so much an update as it is an expression and statement from this board on recent events that have been extremely troubling to not only our community, but our country and region. The Greenwich Board of Selectmen today is presenting the following statement on the recent rise in acts of religious intolerance. And it reads as follows. The Greenwich Board of Selectmen is deeply concerned by the recent rise in incidents of regional and national religious intolerance, including anti-Semitism. We want to be clear that such acts will not be tolerated in Greenwich. We all must remain vigilant in our affirmation that this country was founded upon the principles of freedom of religion. We agree with the President's recent statement before a joint session of the U.S. Congress that, quote, recent threats targeting Jewish community centers and vandalism of Jewish cemeteries, as well as last week's shooting in Kansas City, remind us that while we may be a nation divided on policies, we are a country that stands united in condemning hate and evil in all of its very ugly forms. To ensure that Greenwich will not witness any of these insidious acts, the Greenwich Police Department and its Community Impact Section is conducting outreach to various community organizations and are patrolling sensitive areas as a result of this heightened behavior. The late Selectman David Tice comes to mind because he always wore and distributed a 9/11 memorial pin that read, "United we stand." We think this message is most powerful in combating the type of behavior exhibited by people who preach hate and discrimination. The town of Greenwich has zero tolerance. We offer that, and I think it certainly speaks for itself because we have received concerns expressed by members of our community. And I think it's important for all of us in this room and in the broader Greenwich community to stand united and continue to speak out against acts of this insidious behavior. And so we are affirming that, and we will be distributing it, and thank you if you carry it in the press. In terms of further updates, there was a meeting held on February 27th by the American Legion Post 29. They are located at 248 Glenville Road in the Glenville section of Greenwich. And the purpose of the meeting was the installation of new officers. And I did attend that ceremony as part of our overall initiative to coordinate and bring together all the various groups that support the men and women who've served in our armed forces. At this ceremony, the organization installed Peter LeBeau as their commander, Jim Heavey as their vice commander, Craig Connolly as their adjutant, Vin Massey as their finance officer, Dan Griffin as their service officer, and the co-chairs of the youth programs, Livy Florian and Irv Porter. The event was well attended by representatives of the community and town government. George O'Laughlin, who is a member of the Department of Social Services, hope to be soon Human Services, is our coordinator for Veteran Affairs here in our town of Greenwich. On March 3rd, I received a copy of a letter that was sent to Commissioner Amy Siebert, copied to me, and it reads as follows. It was from Greenwich Municipal Employees Federal Credit Union, 439 West Putnam Avenue, Greenwich, Connecticut. Commissioner Siebert, on Monday afternoon, the town of Greenwich posted signs on Old Post Road number 3 stating that there would be no street parking because the area was going to be cleaned on Wednesday, March 3rd. I was glad to see those signs because the street and the adjacent island to West Putnam Avenue was in desperate need of cleaning. As I drove into the street this morning, I was in total amazement how wonderful the street looked. The credit union has owned the property since 1988, and never has the street in the neighborhood looked so immaculate. For years, I would constantly have to pick up all the leaves and debris from our own driveway that were blowing in from the street. I want to commend James Clifford and his hardworking team for taking care of my neighborhood. It was very rewarding to see people take pride in their work. Gail Todd. And I just offer that because we often don't say thank you enough to the men and women who provide civil service. And when people take the time to write, it's important to acknowledge and thank them. So kudos to them. We are going to be hearing later in the agenda on the subject of water, which is one of the most pressing issues facing the town at this moment. Aside from anything else, the adequacy of our water supply is an integral part of our ability to sustain ourselves and our way of life. There were 2 meetings held this week, one in Stamford and one in Darien. The first one in Stamford was a collaboration between the city of Stamford, the town of Greenwich, the town of New Canaan, and Darien, and it was really centered on public education and working with Aquarian in the State Department of Public Health. In attendance at the meeting from the town of Greenwich was Caroline Baisley, our Director of Health, Michael Long, our Superintendent, Director of Environmental Health, and Denise Savage, our Conservation Director. The purpose of that meeting was to bring together various representatives of irrigation companies in the green industry to look at methods in reducing the overall necessity and utilization of these systems. Considerable amount of education will be occurring, frankly, beginning today when we hear from Denise Savageau, but ongoing throughout our region to inform all of us that you, in fact, do not need to water your lawn every single day, perhaps sometimes twice a day, to keep it green. And so there was a considerable amount of effort to provide information as to what other parts of our country have done to reduce the overall demand on water by reducing utilization of outdoor irrigation systems. It was very well attended. I would gather there was somewhere in about 150 people from not only irrigation companies, but the, call it the green industry, those who do landscape architecture and so forth. And so that was well attended, and the message was very clear as to what can and should be done. And we thank Stanford for hosting that at UConn Stanford. The second meeting was held yesterday, and it was in the Darien Town Hall, and it is the Water Conservation Task Force, for which Denise is our primary member. I had the opportunity to attend myself yesterday, and considerable discussions occurred about the policies that are in place or not in place that affect water resources within our state, and what mechanisms are in place to trigger conservation measures. And one of the takeaways from it is there is a lack of uniformity throughout our region and in the state as to triggers and as to methodologies in keeping the supply adequate. We in Greenwich are fortunate that we have an ordinance, for which we'll be talking about in the meeting shortly, that actually puts into place conservation measures. Some communities do not have that, and they have less ability to help regulate and conserve. The good news is that the conservation measures in Greenwich have worked, and we applaud our citizens who have undertaken not only the adherence to the outdoor water ban, but actually continue to conserve 20% of water use in their homes. And that is a very, very admirable result, and should not be just passed over. I think we're going to continue to advocate that, and the only way we're going to be successful is with everyone's help, and our people are our most precious and most powerful resource. So all of you, thank you for what you're doing. Continue to impress upon your friends and family members to make that extra effort to not only conserve, but perhaps institute improvements in your home that will help conserve water utilization. So that took place on Wednesday. One of the gentlemen in attendance was from New Canaan. He happens to be a geologist, and a discussion ensued about the necessity to undertake a geological survey, not only of Greenwich. We've actually done it, and Denise was instrumental in the early 2000s in getting the USGS to come in and do that. So we have a baseline to know what our underground water resources look like. Unfortunately, the other communities don't have that yet. They're quite envious that we do have this as a point of departure. So we're going to work through our regional entities to see if we could procure funding and do another one that would give a broader geographic area and show what's taking place. This gentleman was telling us about a tremendously massive water element within the town of New Canaan that was consuming, I want to say he said 15,000 gallons a day, some astronomical a number. And there was very little that could be done to regulate this. And of course, it affects neighboring properties. So listen, water is something we all enjoy, but it's not infinite. It's a limited resource. So we'll be hearing more about that later. There's materials that will be distributed in your mailbox. They will be coming from Aquarian. They are undertaking a fairly sophisticated campaign, and it looks like this. And it says, ban on outdoor irrigation continues, defeat the drought, now allow drip irrigation, soak hoses, and handheld watering. On the back, it just reaffirms that the outdoor irrigation ban is still in effect for Greenwich, Stamford, Darien, and New Canaan. And more information is certainly available through their website. And this is, again, a partnership between the 4 towns served by Aquarian and Aquarian itself. Final point, and again, hear about this, more about this shortly, is that this also applies to people who are on underground water resources, because the reservoirs and the underground water resources, there's a correlation. So we've heard previous even to the drought, people whose wells have been running low or dry. And we need to really impress upon people, but this is an across-the-board initiative. It affects everybody.
I'm glad you bring that up as a point, because we were receiving, correspondence from people who operated just on well and why it pertained to them only, and some were, yeah.
And there's a lot of data, that was passed out in terms of recharging. Greenwich happens to have more shallow reservoirs. So in some respects, we deplete more quickly, but we recharge more quickly than Stamford. There's the overall discussion about water being reallocated to various communities. Aquarian has agreements with Suez, which is a company that supplies communities in Westchester. There's a longstanding agreement that results in the question, well, what are they doing in Westchester? They also should be conserving, and we're looking at ensuring that happens through our representative. But one of the questions came up was, well, Greenwich is using more water than Stamford. Why should Stamford embark on a serious conservation measure? And my point was that this knows no boundary. I don't think it's productive to get into a political with a small p, you use more than us, because the metrics, you have to really analyze them to make an affirming statement to that. The fact is, it's a limited resource, and we all have to be responsible in how we use it. And that really falls to the state right now, the Department of Public Health, who is sort of the overseer of this and issues various orders, which Denise will discuss. So at least it removes that potential political, with a small p, debate of us versus them. It's never a constructive argument, because everyone wants to ensure that as a society we have water to sustain ourselves. So I think we've moved beyond that, which is a good thing. And again, we'll be hearing more from Denise shortly under our agenda item. Perhaps turning to the two of you, there was an event here while I was away so I cannot speak to it, concerning infrastructure. Drew, did you want to touch on it? You hosted, or Senator Murphy hosted, a program focused on infrastructure renewal. Perhaps you could just give an update.
Well, the update, I mean, it was well attended, which was great.
And you attended as well.
He did. It was. I tried to make it as bipartisan as I can. And it $1 trillion, and I think the president announced today too that he wanted to go forward with that. $1 trillion seems like a lot of money, but you divide that by 50 with thousands upon thousands of projects. You have to break that down. But I think it's, once again, independent of political party, Senator Murphy and Senator Blumenthal both are going to advocate for the projects that are needed in Connecticut. And they're in Connecticut alone, there are hundreds upon hundreds. So it's a work in progress. John, I mean.
One of the things that I took away from it that the senator said was, this is going to be very disruptive and it's going to be very expensive.
Sure.
It needs to be done.
Yeah.
Well, thank you both. I had the opportunity to see infrastructure firsthand driving down to Florida over the break. And in terms of having not done that in a while, you recognize the breadth of the infrastructure, particularly when you take different routes, one going more rural and one coming back extremely urban. And it does speak to the necessity that, for the 21st century, we need to come into the 21st century, given the demands on the infrastructure. As you drive over some of these bridges, you take a leap of faith that it's going to be sustainable. So,
one other thing, there was something in the paper yesterday about some city, I forget where it was, where they had roads that were potholed, and what they're doing now, they're milling them down and just making them gravel roads because they can't afford to keep them paved.
well,
That'll go over big here.
it's not going to happen here.
Yeah, we can all buy horses. So.
Mr. Raymer's the patron saint of paving. He wants to always boost the budget for paving, so we're fortunate. Yeah, we have that paving management index system, so hopefully we won't get to that. But as a follow-up to it, and perhaps we can ask Commissioner Siebert, but someone had mentioned to me there was a story in the newspaper about the bridge on Interstate 95 between Byram and Portchester and its rating and in its condition. And I think we should find out specifically, but I drove over it last night and lost alignment on my car. There's definitely a sort of a no man's land area where it doesn't seem to be maintained. But I did want to get that from Amy. What is the condition of it? Because it not only traverses the Byram River, but, we have people traveling underneath it on local roads in Byram regularly, so.
One thing that was distributed at the senators' meeting was a list of projects that are going on here in town. Which bridge on US 1 is being replaced?
There is a bridge, you wouldn't know it's there. It's between Hillside and Old Post Road, number 6 in Indian Field, near the Millbrook Country Club, and the road that, I'm trying to think of the name of it. Someone here has to be from Millbrook who knows the road that you come in that takes you right to the club. But the bridge, West Brother? Thank you, West Brother. Thank you, Ms. Dayton. There is a bridge there underneath the Route 1. It ties into some of the work the Flood and Erosion Control Board is doing to improve not only the infrastructure, but the state needs to replace it. It's going to be a very lengthy project. I want to say like 18 months. And they're going to have to shut down lanes at prescribed periods of time to accomplish the replacement. But if you're walking on Route 1 up toward Coscob, there's like a wooden bridge that goes over it. If you look down, there's a quite old structure, stone, that they're proposing to replace. In terms of meetings, not here in Greenwich, but there was one on March 1st in Hartford, and it was before the legislature's Education Committee, and it was a subject that is very much in the forefront of the minds of people here in Greenwich, particularly in Byram, and that pertains to the New Lebanon School and its building project. While I was unable to attend, I sent a letter of support in seeing to it that the state fulfills its commitment to Greenwich in providing the funds necessary to complete the rebuilding of the New Lebanon Elementary School. We were fortunate to receive emails from our constituencies, the vast majority totally in support of the state maintaining its commitment to the town as prescribed in their agreement in addressing our the issue of racial imbalance. And I do want to thank all those folks who took the time not only to write, but to attend, our Board of Education, who've been at the forefront of this, as well as our state delegation. It is one issue that I think, talking about uniting people, it's united the town in support of providing a adequate, modernized facility for students in that area of town. So again, thank you to all those who attended. We will not know the outcome perhaps for some time, but it's one that I think everyone is monitoring most carefully and closely. So I see several members of the Board of Ed here. Thank you for your continued leadership and advocacy on that issue. Appreciate it. Pardon me. That concludes the updates. The first item under old business, and Denise, I apologize to you because I committed to you, you were going to be first, but before I committed to you, a commitment was made to the committee that they could present their report first. So thank you for indulging us. Today we are going to just receive, we've gotten it, but receive the report from the Selectmen's Board of Education Charter Revision Advisory Committee. As many know, a committee was formed as the result of a request to look at the form of governance of our Board of Ed. This is not really a new issue in terms of this question has come up several times before, probably in the last 2 decades. Considerable amount of work was undertaken by these 5 members, and again, Ms. Caldwell, who chaired the committee, could not be with us today. I spoke to her before the start of the meeting to ensure if she would participate by phone. Unfortunately, for personal reasons, she cannot, but she did wish to convey to you, the members of our board, and thereby the public, her gratitude and appreciation to each and every one of the members of the committee for their time, for their collegiality and professionalism in how they undertook the task. She admires each and every one of you, she wanted me to say, and is grateful for your contributions with her to this task. So while she's not with us in presence, we do thank her as well for her time and care on the issue. So the committee was charged with initially with a specific proposal that was sent to us to look at, but it was also made clear that they were to look beyond that as well. And so today we're going to hear, I believe, Brian Paldunas, you are going to present the report. Mr. Finger, you're going to present, call it the minority report or a different point of view. But that is the extent of what we're going to be doing today, is just receiving the report. We will take comment at a public hearing, which is scheduled for next week at 6 o'clock in this room on Wednesday, the 15th. And then we have tentatively scheduled a meeting to take any action on Thursday. Ultimately, as most things in this town go, the RTM has the final say in making changes to our charter or any provisions. So we will, if we move any, it goes to the RTM for consideration. So,
Mr. Chairman, can I just bring up one thing? Just in terms of scheduling, I know, would you indulge, the committee spent, as you know, first of all, I want to thank the committee, first of all, for their report, and you'll see, independent of how you feel, there's no question that time and effort and diligence was put in towards this. My concern, independent, once again, of how this board votes, if, 6 months, they have 19 different options, the public hearing scheduled for next week, the next day, though, to vote, would you consider postponing that, or is it the goal to get it on the April call?
but one of the
I don't. But here's my point, though, Peter. I don't see any negative about putting it on the June call because in having more public. I think that does our board some justice too, in terms of someone can't say to us that we didn't comprehend this after the 6 months they put into it.
Right. Well, again, I think, first off, we have to let them present the report, and we have to read the report to know what they're recommending. I wouldn't necessarily rely on press reports, as good as the press may be. And we have to talk with our legal department. So that's the first step. There is a prescribed process. I know that Wayne could not be with us today. He has had 2 deaths in his family within 2 days. Very tragic set of circumstances, perhaps not unexpected, but nonetheless a tragedy when you have 2 deaths come within 1 day of each other. So he could not be with us, but he is aware of it. So in terms of it, we are scheduling the meeting. The board can choose to act or not act, but ultimately there's a time schedule which I want to hear about, because it's not clear to me when you say it has to be acted upon in 6 months from the date approved or something, what that means in terms of taking effect. So that's one of our questions we'll have to ask him. But so, Mr. Paldunas, are you going to present? You're the secretary of the committee, correct? And just for public edification, the report is online.
Yes, it is.
Under the committee's tab, right?
It's under the Board of Selectmen's website page. You then open up the committees appointed by the Board of Selectmen, and it would be the Selectmen's Board of Education Charter Revision Committee, and you open up that link, and all of the documents related to the report and any other documents accepted and reviewed by the committee are in that link.
Thank you, Ms. Hines. So, Mr. Paldunas, if you could, we received the report, 22 pages, and
Yep. Good morning. I'm here as a representative of the committee to transmit the committee's report to the Board of Selectmen. I'd like first to thank for contributions, for their thoughts, for the ideas, the public and the interested parties that contributed to the report. I would like to specifically thank Barbara for putting up with us and scheduling and accommodating in all of our changes, and for the Law Department and the Registrar's Department for answering questions and questions about questions ad infinitum. And specifically, I'd like to thank the other members of the committee, Peter Von Braun, Barry Rickert, Bill Finger, and obviously Joan Caldwell, who is the chair of the committee. In formulating a recommendation, we went through a process where we identified goals. We took input and research and formulated our recommendation. From a goals point of view, as laid out in the report, we focused on 4 things: competition, choice, voter engagement, and accountability. And I'm not going to go into details, it's in the report. Based on that, we looked at input from the public, from what we called interested parties, which would include the town committees on the Republican and Democratic town committees, the Board of Education, former Board of Education chairs and members, and a variety of other inputs. We looked at research and conducted some of our own investigations and discussions, and we evaluated all that information that we gathered. In some cases, we took what I would call a deep dive in particular areas that were of interest, and the best example would be looking at the possibility of a nonpartisan board, and we went into detail with the Law Department in the discussions about that. The recommendation itself is based on what we believe achieves the goals that were set out, and secondarily to minimize disruption, given the circumstances now where we are in the middle of a search for a Board of Education, or I'm sorry, a superintendent. I'm going to read the brief recommendation. By a vote of 4-1, the committee recommends that the town of Greenwich modify the town charter to elect 3 Board of Education members in one municipal election cycle and 5 Board of Education members in the other municipal election cycle. Further, the committee recommends that the town of Greenwich adopt provisions of the Connecticut General Statutes which allow each political party to nominate and voters to vote for the total number of candidates to be elected, i.e., in this case, 3 or 5. So that's the specific recommendation. There are also contained in the report what we called encouragements, where the town charter or the statutes could not specify, but we would like to encourage various parties with a small p to encourage more or follow these recommendations to encourage more participation, easier participation, and more education of voters and potential candidates for the Board of Education. We'd also like to reflect a little bit of frustration that primarily as a result of state statutes, there's not a whole heck of a lot of ways of engaging or improving the involvement of unaffiliated voters. And that's part of why the recommendations are there, part of the encouragements are there to see if we can improve that. With that, I will say, I will answer any questions clarifying what's in the document, but I'm sure the public debate will be interesting.
One of the questions I have is we've heard referred to the Glastonbury model.
Right.
Is that, in fact, what your committee is recommending?
In part, yes. The Glastonbury Board of Education is elected. It's 8 members. It's elected on a 3 and 5 cycle, which is what we're recommending. The Glastonbury charter, though, specifies that the parties can only nominate the number that would be electable from their party. So instead of, in what we're recommending would be, if you're, give the best example would be, if there are 5 seats up for election, each party could nominate up to 5 people. In Glastonbury, they could only nominate up to 3 people, because that's the amount that could be elected. So you could have 6 people running for 5 spots, whereas what we're recommending would be 10 people running for 5 spots from the parties themselves. So the Glastonbury model is the 3 and 5, but we recommended slightly different on the number of nominees.
So distinguishing from the current system, so the number of members of the board stays the
Stays the
same,
same,
different
correct.
from what was initially requested
Correct.
to expand. The proposal, if I'm understanding, still results in parties nominating more people than can be elected.
Correct. So you still have,
Distinguishing from Glastonbury. So so just to be careful, I don't want to go around saying, well, you're doing the Glastonbury model when, in fact, what the recommendation from the majority is really a hybrid.
Correct.
Of that. I'm just curious as to what discussions occurred around that, because one of the comments we've heard from some people like it, some people don't, is you create a primary in November with parties having people compete against one another in the same group.
well, the folks within a party would still be competing against each other like they are now, but there's also, unlike now, if this is adopted, there is inter-party competition also. Part of what the committee one of the goals was obviously to increase or improve the choice open to the voters. And if we were to adopt I'll call it the pure Glastonbury model with the limited number of nominees, then the choice of the voters would be 6 people for 5 seats, potentially 6 people for 5 seats. We thought that it was worthwhile having that more open, inclusive election with
Understood.
potentially 10 for, the parties could still choose to only nominate 3 or 4 or 2 or whatever they want, obviously.
So that stays the same. So basically, it stays the same.
Well, it stays the same, but let's point out the obvious, though. I mean, right now, we have intra-party competition. You could.
Intra, correct.
Yes, correct. The difference here, though, is you will have, as an end result, an unbalanced board.
You potentially, but the voters could also elect, decide that they want a balanced board. That was one of the benefits, I think, of this model over a 9 or 10, well, a 9 or 7, which is 2 of the other things that we considered, is those would force unbalanced. This leaves the opportunity for the voters to make that choice.
Has Glastonbury found, I mean, with an unbalanced board, that scores went up? Did the committee go into achievement or what it would look like with unintended consequences of going from a century-old system to a system now that has the potential of causing attended consequences?
We looked at for the Durg A and Durg B schools, most comparable to Greenwich, we looked at the size of the board and with the, I forget the technical term, the Connecticut accountability rules or report that recently came out. We were using the older one when we were formulating, that there is no, as far as we could see, significant difference between a 7-member board, an 8-member board, and a 9-member board as far as the accountability index between those 3.
Yeah, but my point is, I'm worried about the unbalanced part of it and what that's really going to look like. I go back to, once again, this issue of competition, and we can debate, once again, this is where it's going to go down, this is where it's going to get political in terms of whatever. But in reality, what does that look like in Greenwich with an unbalanced board? You're not concerned about that? Because what is wrong with the system now?
Okay, I'm prepared to answer that. I don't know if.
I'm asking it. I'm one of the
Okay.
selectmen.
Okay.
You can.
Well, okay, then I'll get out my thoughts. There is nothing wrong with what we're doing now. the question that was put to us is, what could we improve? Okay? I would venture to say that if we are not looking at a proposal that potentially could improve the Board of Education, and by extension, not only the Board of Education, but the ability of the voters to express their opinion as to who should be on the board, because it's relatively limited now. I think everybody would agree with that. Yes? No?
I don't, but
Well, right now, to the most part, the town committees dictate. But I guess I look at it and say, if we have, if you're looking at what would make the better for the students.
well, ultimately, that's the goal here.
Absolutely. And
But my question though is, I don't want to get into the politics. I want to, with an unbalanced board, how does it make it better for the students? That's what I'm trying to get at here.
There's no guarantees. But I guess what I'm saying is, what is the purpose of any legislation is to look at, propose, debate, and enact something that we believe would make it better. And we think that by reflecting more clearly the will of the voters in the election process, you have the possibility, the belief that you are going to improve the people improve the reflection of the committee or the community's desires as to what the Board of Education should be doing. If I equate it to, there's this apocryphal story of the chair or the commissioner of the patent office back in 1899 who said, well, everything's been invented, we can close down. Well, if we are not willing to look at the possibility of what we believe might make a law might make things better, why don't we just stop government?
So my last question, Mr. Chairman. So what if the town committees don't put up? You have 1 year that's 3, correct? 1 year that's 5.
Correct.
Now I would assume you're going to get a better response. Who wants to run? You're going to have more candidates, one would imagine, running against 3 versus 5. That's a whole other debate. But in the end, what prevents the town committees from giving that choice by just putting up 3?
Well,
Or 5.
then again, you are no better off than you are now, but we're opening up the opportunity for that.
I get the opportunity, but you know in reality, how difficult it is to recruit candidates anyway. You're not concerned that we're going to be
part of.
So here, the unintended consequences. What you don't want to happen here is, the RTM votes. We go to this proposal, and then in the end, you just have both town committees putting up the limited amount of numbers because they don't want people competing against each other. Then you have unbalanced boards, and after all this work has been done, that's what happens. That's the reality of it.
And part of the recommendations or the encouragements, I guess, let me be clear, is for the town committees to actively recruit. We had discussions with Mr. Raymer and with Mr. Walco about that. How do we encourage, and we recognize we can't force, how do we encourage you to recruit and get more people involved in the process?
But Brian, the reality of it, though. Is that going to happen? I bet you it's not. I will say that.
We don't know.
Well, again,
I don't know, but this is my
belief.
My opinion. Look, in hopes that you will. I mean, I guess, but in reality, so you're gonna have to recruit 5 from 1, 3. They're gonna be competing against each other. Ultimately, you're gonna have 5 people competing against literally 8 different people. I don't.
Isn't that what elections are about? Competition? Open competition?
Yeah,
as
but
opposed
one would
to,
argue.
we talk about competitive elections now. They are not competitive elections. They are competitive within the party, but they're not competitive across all of the candidates.
You have another question?
No, I'm done.
You have a question?
No.
I don't have any further questions for you. Again, I appreciate the effort that you put forward. I had 17 meetings, probably several hours each, in addition to all of the written documentation, research. Well appreciated and respected for that. If
That I do. I agree.
we have a
Thank you.
question, we can pose the questions to you.
Yes.
And
I'll make sure that the entire committee opines.
great. Again, thank you very much.
Thank you
And
for your time.
really, thank you to each of the folks. I see Mr. Finger and Mr. Von Braun.
I don't see.
I don't see Mr. Rickard, and we know Ms. Caudwell, but I do, we'll formally send them a thank you, but again, thank you very much for your, and so now we'll hear from Mr. Finger. Welcome, Mr. Finger. And thank you again for your service.
Thanks, Bill.
Before I start, I just want to, as a resident of the town, thank you, Board of Selectmen, for taking the stand on racial intolerance. Just wanted to thank the Board of Selectmen for taking their statement in opposition to religious intolerance. I appreciate that, and that's I'm proud that our town is taking a stand. Thank you. While we're on thank yous, I want to echo what Brian had said and what the message that Joan passed through Peter to thank my fellow committee members. There was a great deal of collegiality. I think we all worked thoroughly and collectively to come to an understanding on this issue, despite the fact that our recommendations are different. But we did work quite well together. So yes, we did have different recommendations. I was the one who voted against the recommendation that you just heard Brian present to you. My recommendation is that no change be made to the town charter. The current language in the Greenwich Town Charter meets all the four goals which guided the committee, those being choice, competition, voter engagement, and accountability. Our current town charter provisions and applicable state statutes currently provide readily available pathways for an unlimited number of potential candidates to run for a seat on the Board of Education. A charter change will not result in greater voter engagement. Voter engagement is going to be determined by the number of candidates who choose to run. Currently, and as it should be, individual members of the Board of Education are held accountable to the voters. A Board of Ed members' individual record and policy decisions should drive accountability, not party affiliation. And under current state statutes, Greenwich's current balanced bipartisan Board of Ed structure is as close to the nonpartisan structure which was referenced by many people as being the ideal structure for a Board of Education. And when I say many people, I'm talking about people who attended our meetings, who spoke at our public hearing, in conversations that we've had with executives from the superintendent search firms, both current and past. So that's what I reference, and a number, certainly myself, speaking for myself, and I believe at least some of the members on our committee felt there was a great deal of merit in a nonpartisan board. Unfortunately, state statute, as I indicated, does not provide for that. To conclude, the existing Board of Ed structure as provided for in our town charter is one that should be embraced, and this is all in my report, embraced, protected, and looked upon for what it is, the best option available given existing state statute requirements. You heard the recommendation and discussion from Brian on why my colleagues came to their recommendation. I submit that what they proposed was a solution that was looking for a problem. If there's a problem, that problem lies with state statutes and some local town committee rules dealing with ballot access. The problem is not the town charter, and that's why I recommend that there not be a change in the town charter. And if any of you have questions, I'd be more than happy to address your questions now or in any time during your deliberations.
Sure, and again, I do want to thank you, because reviewing your report, like everyone's work, very well thought out. Bill, this is more just a question and a comment. Reading on page 4, your concern, and I've heard this expressed by members of the public, perhaps some affiliated with the Democratic Party, that page 4, paragraph 2, where it talks about.
I'm sorry, paragraph 4.
Paragraph 2.
Yep.
In looking at the potential, what I'm interpreting as what you're saying, unintended consequences of such a change, where it talks about interjecting perhaps national education issues into local discourse. And it says, are issues such as the role of religion in public schools, portability of funds for school choice, sexual orientation, gender identification, going to be part of the debate? And I guess my comment is, do we have any examples based upon elections that have occurred where the offices have been competitively elected, where we've seen such a extreme point of view presented? Because really what I'm hearing is the concern about this is that there's the potential for an extreme element in the community to somehow come in and take over the Board of Ed, infringe upon people's rights. And I respect you raising the concern, but I'm essentially saying, do we have faith in our voters, who I think have exhibited over the last several decades, let's take out locally, but nationally, I'll go on record, nationally, this is a community that people, again, stereotype, and I've heard this stereotype, and I try to say, well, not really. And this is what I've heard, so don't.
That's okay.
Sort of a blue blood, waspy republicanism. Yet, in 2008, this community voted for a Democrat for president, and in 2016 it did. So my concern about that being so emphatic is that doesn't reconcile with really the way the voters have reflected their wishes.
So
I know it's a concern, and it's a valid concern, but does it really reconcile with the intelligence, the judgment, and the objectivity by which people exercise their right here, which I think has been pretty clear?
I'm glad you asked that question. Very
I'm
good
just
question.
curious.
First of all, I'll get directly, I'll answer that question directly, but first let me just say that unintended consequences are many. There's stifling discussion, decisions made in caucus, things of that sort. The only reason that language that you referenced is in my report is in response to what is a supporting statement included in the majority's recommendation. They specifically said that on the accountability issue and the possibility of political partisanship and an unbalanced board, political parties could be held accountable. Therefore, their recommendation, they say, could and should possibly result in local town committees looking into creating their education platforms and modeling it after the national party platforms. And if you look at national party platforms, as you reference, total different context than what we do here locally. I agree. I think, generally speaking, Greenwich, the discourse, most of the time is at a much better and reasonable level and rational level than some of the national discourse. But I put this in here only to respond to the suggestion and one of the support statements in the recommendation of my opponent, of my colleagues on their recommendation.
Okay.
It's the only reason.
No,
That's the
thank you.
fear that I have. So
Yeah,
that's why
no.
I wanted to address it. Not me raising the red flag on my own. It's in response to theirs.
No, it's an excellent explanation. Thank you. Okay. Thank you. Again, I think you hit a point when you came up and acknowledged the statement, because, I mean, underlying all this, and I've had these discussions with folks in the community, both political sides of the aisle, and it's hard because we live in such a media-intense society, and we're infiltrated with information 24/7. And it's hard not for people to succumb to that way of being. Perhaps naively, I still believe deep down that this community has a much higher standard than that. I mean, I'm not speaking just to this, but even with the issue earlier that you prefaced about religious tolerance. And I'm just hopeful that and I think we've demonstrated it on this board, and I do think other boards have as well, that we continue to strive to maintain that and raise that bar and let us set the standard for other people and how we go about doing things. Because I think it's respected by the vast majority of the citizens, and it's made for better government and better community. So I thank you for answering
Can I
that.
just respond to, I think, one of the things that either Drew asked directly or
Sure.
might have inferred, and that is the possibility of an unbalanced, politically partisan board. To me, it's included in this report, I don't think politics should have any role in educational decision-making. Therefore, I don't think party politics, political partisanship should have a role on the Board of Education. That being said, I think people in this town are going to look at that issue of an unbalanced board in the lens of the current majority party in this town controlling things. The reality is, I think that is likely to happen, but this balanced board nature in our charter has been here since maybe 1939, when the charter was first adopted on a special act or approved. Things change. In 1966, when the board went from a 6-person balanced board to an 8-person balanced board, registration was 55% Republican, 17% Democrat. It's now 36 or 37 and 26. Things change. So when I say political partisanship is not good, it's not good if in my opinion, if the Republican Party has the majority on the board, and it's not good if the Democrat Party.
Well, that was my question to you, Bill. I was going to ask that, actually. You know, you're in the minority report. Would you feel the same way if your party was in? Would you still be in the minority?
I am.
Or
I still feel that way. Like I said, I don't think party politics has any role in education. And as pointed out in the report, we're the only state in Connecticut, only state in New England that has partisanship as an opportunity. All the other states have nonpartisan Board of Educations. 85% of boards of education in the country are nonpartisan. Now, that's not an issue we can solve by charter. That's a state statute thing. So I believe, like most other people, that party politics, whether it's Democrat, Republican, or some other group, should not have a controlling interest on the Board of Education.
Here's a question related to that point, because we heard about the whole effort to try to see if we could look at the nonpartisan board. And this really is for us. If that is in fact a desired outcome, do you as a member of the committee think it's worthwhile to advocate jointly as a community through the state election process, so 18, that we want legislation passed and supported by whomever, that this be changed?
I do.
I mean, that would then take the whole issue to a whole nother level.
Sure.
I mean, the statistic that you said was that 85% of school boards are in the
According to the
country.
Connecticut Associated Board of Education's, 85%, yes.
I mean, I'd be interested in having that as a discussion in true commitment on the part of people. And again, you know, how do we measure that locally? I mean, I come back to the RTM. I mean, they're ultimately the people's body, as it said. So, I mean, they pass sense of the meetings all the time, regularly. So perhaps we'll hear that. I mean, I don't know. I just think we want to get a truer sense of what our electorate thinks.
But, you know, you talk about the RTM, but the buck stops there, but it starts with you. It doesn't get there unless you put it there. So that's just something for you to think about.
Well, you know, Jim Lash said this one time, if the issues don't get raised, then they don't get discussed, and then nothing, you know, you don't advance or you don't find out what's happening. So I'm a big believer in surfacing issues. I think particularly if people have a rational interest in bringing it forward, I think it serves us well. I mean, this was done by Jim on the RTM. He looked at a committee, and they looked at the 2007 about the governance of RTM, and it stands as a foundation for people who have the question, well, how effective is RTM? What's the attendance? The League of Women Voters just picked up on this recently. And so this is the first time that I can recall that the efforts of a group of people formally established resulted in a report of the quality that we're seeing. That when we're not here, someone may raise the question, if things stay the same, why don't we look at changing it? They have a place to go, because it's often disparate. You know, the stuff gets put in a memo in the law department. It's not in the public domain as this is, and I think that's always a good outcome to me, because it's.
You mentioned the League of Women Voters. I mean, to me, it would be beneficial to the whole community, to the entire community, if the League of Women Voters got involved in this issue, if for no other reason than to have their own forums and debates to discuss it, because I think it's a very important issue. To me, it's not a black or white decision. There's a lot of discussions. I mean, you heard Brian give his explanations for why, to Drew's question. I mean, I can give you mine. I can guarantee you, as Brian, I'm sure, would agree, we've heard many people in our public hearings who have other reasons why they support one concept, even though this was never in front of the public when we had that public hearing. But people had different points of view. They support one position for one or two or three different reasons. Somebody opposes another thing for one, two, or three reasons. And I don't think you get a full understanding and a full appreciation of the issues unless you have a debate, as opposed to somebody just coming up and saying, this is good because of, or that's not good because of. I think when people can actually have a discussion, you can have a more robust and beneficial conversation leading to a decision.
Mr. Chairman, or Bill or even Brian, can talk of or is it legal to talk of the time frame then? In terms of the 6 month, you mentioned something about the 6 month.
Well, that's to do with the charter process and that's really has to do with any, I think, charter change of when it would take effect. And unfortunately, Wayne's not here to clarify it, but
this is an important issue. To me, we shouldn't be dictated by rushing it to meet a certain timetable. I mean, the proposal, as I understand it, when it first came in front of the RTM was 2000, when did Barry and those guys, 2015 or something like that. So again, this is changing a charter. This is a big thing. This is a charter that a town charter, I think you would agree, shouldn't be changed just for the sake of changing, because things might happen one way or they might not happen another way. I think one should take the time. I'm not saying what that time is, but I think it would benefit everybody if it was given the proper vetting that I think, and I probably think they would agree it deserves.
From the statute that we would rely on to have what they call the rotation, the 3 and the 5 elected, is section 9206A. And in there, it specifically says that it will take effect 6 months after adopted. So if we work back from the November election, you're back into May, obviously early May, before the May RTM meeting, which would be then the April meeting would be the only window. June would not be appropriate. June would not impact the November election.
For this November, you mean?
Yes,
Okay,
correct,
okay.
correct. So, and I had that conversation with Wayne. I asked him to confirm that back to you.
Well, that question was asked. That's why I was trying to get clarification. It was asked to me, and I recalled something about the 6 months, but I wanted to hear it from. That's helpful. So again, thank you both. I mean, the dates we gave out earlier, the public hearing on the topic, again, we could put out in a notice like where the reports are, and people can avail themselves to it.
Okay, and there are also hard copies of the reports, both the majority and the minority reports, in the back on the table, if anybody would like to grab a copy today.
Great, and again, thank you both. Really good. This is a testament to the value the citizens play. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Barbara.
Okay. The next item on the agenda today is an update and review of the townwide water use restrictions. As I started out the meeting, there's been a lot of activity taking place on this subject. With us today is our Conservation Director, Denise Savageau, and accompanying her is our Director of Health, Caroline Baisley. Thanks, Denise.
So good evening. I'm going to stand over here so I can operate and give you a little bit of a presentation in terms of where we are with our water supply. Again, my name is Denise Savageau. I'm the Conservation Director for the town of Greenwich, and I lead our water supply team. Just so folks know, I also serve on the State of Connecticut Water Planning Council Advisory Group. I actually am one of just a handful of folks who represent municipalities on there. Actually, I was the sole person, and we now have someone, the Director of Health from Darien now also serves on that. So there's now two of us from municipalities in a group that provides information to the State Water Planning Council on water supply. Water Planning Council is comprised of the Director of OPM, the Director of DEEP, the Director of Public Health, or their appointee, and the Director of the Public Utilities Regulatory Authority, PURA. So that council is a four-board council of these four state agencies that really look at water supply in Greenwich. And so I just wanted to point that out because one of the things that's happening statewide is a state water planning effort going on. And part of that is because of challenges that are happening around the state and things we've been looking at. As part of that work group, I co-chaired a work group on updating the state's drought management plan. We just finished that this past year, and it's actually before the Water Planning Council to be adopted, and we'll see, where that is because it's a big document looking at how we deal with that. And one of the things they're looking at that is because they have this whole state water planning effort going on at the same time, they're looking at that drought management plan and how it falls into the context of this whole larger state water plan. The reason I wanted to bring this up again is because obviously our part of the town, our section of the state, I should say, has a lot of expertise in water supply, and the town of Greenwich is one of the few towns that has an ordinance. So I'm gonna go over that. Just quickly, in Greenwich, the sources of our drinking water, we have surface water. Approximately 88% of our households rely on that, and basically most of our business district. We have a few things like some churches and whatever that may be served by community wells, but far and large, most folks are served by the system. It includes the Barge, Putnam, and Rockwood reservoirs. The Barge, as you know, is located in Stamford. It's part of the Mianus River watershed generally, and then two smaller the beginnings of two smaller watersheds. But in the large reservoir is the Barge, and it is part of the Mianus, and that reservoir comes out of New York and Westchester County through Stamford and then into Greenwich. And I think that's important for people to know because we talk about this as a Greenwich system, but the water supply itself is not just from Greenwich, and it doesn't just serve Greenwich. It also serves Rye Brook, Portchester, and then we also have continued transfers, and this has been going on forever, not just during the drought, between Greenwich and Stamford, where there are times when we pull water out of the Mianus that may go to parts of Stamford, and sometimes there's more water coming down, a pipeline that's transferring water from Stamford to Greenwich, depending on what's going on. The other source of water is the groundwater, about 12% of our households, more in terms of area-wise in the town. So it's not 12% of the area, but 12% of the households. And that is groundwater, mostly through bedrock wells. These are bedrock aquifers. We really don't have stratified drift aquifers in Greenwich that are tapped at a large scale. We have some smaller ones associated with a couple of our river corridors, but generally bedrock wells. And this is just an example of looking at, and so on your left-hand side, on the bottom. You're seeing creviced rock. That's the cracks in the bedrock. That's the kind of wells we have there. On the right-hand side, you kind of see where there's a box that says gravel, and that's the unconsolidated, what we call stratified drift, sand and gravels. Those are the bigger reservoirs you see, and you see that a lot in the Connecticut River Valley. I think more importantly is when you look at the top of the diagram and you see surface water. So you see a reservoir or a lake, and then you see how it ties into the water table and groundwater. And I think this is critically important for people to understand that when we're talking about resources, although we identify the source of drinking water as either a surface or groundwater supply, that this is an integrated system. And our restrictions and our ordinances recognize that this is an integrated system, and it recognizes that, groundwater and surface water both need to be protected within the town of Greenwich. And I think the basic premise of this, and one of the reasons that I think Greenwich is ahead of the curve, is we recognize that water supply for drinking and household use is a basic human need and not just a commodity, and it allows us to regulate. So I'm just going to go through an update of the status of where we are with water quickly, and so you can see on this chart dated March 7th, this is where we are right now in terms of an overall drought in the Northeast. You can if you go to the U.S. Drought Monitor, you can Google it, and you can see across the country. And this is quite substantial for the Northeast to be in an extended drought. We are now in the third year of a drought in the Northeast. And then particularly for Connecticut, you can see that darker colored or orangey brown color is basically saying we're in an extreme drought. And we've got a little bit on the shoreline that's not as droughty, but one of the things there is that the stream flow gauges are not as definitive there because obviously a lot of stuff is impacted by the tides. But most of Greenwich, and if you look at that, in Greenwich, where our reservoirs are located, which is the northern part of Greenwich, and also our folks who are served by wells are all in an extreme drought. I think this is a really, really, really telling slide, and the USGS has stream flow gauges in Greenwich and Stamford. The reason I'm not using the Greenwich gauge is because it's on the Byram. The Ripperwam River actually goes through the middle of Stamford. The other thing is this gauge has been established longer, so it can give me a 20-year average, where on the Byram, we've only had that in place for less than 10 years, so I don't have as long of an average. What you're seeing is those diamonds across the top is your average flow for this time of year. So starting in January 2017, we would expect that the blue bars, which is the actual stream flow, to be paralleling, if we were in an average flow year, to being exactly where the diamonds are. What you're seeing is that even though we have rainfall events, which spikes up the hydrograph for a short duration, that immediately you see that dropping down below average. So we're still experiencing below average stream flow, and that's what the stream flow gauges are what they're looking at with that drought monitor report that I showed earlier. So they're basically saying these stream flow gauges are showing that even though we have a storm event, like I said, the hydrograph gets up, we go right back below average, and that's basically helping to basically say, like, so what are the ground conditions? What do we really have in the ground? And the interesting thing is when you understand base flow, and as I showed you the chart where surface water and groundwaters are connected, think about, okay, it's July, it hasn't rained for 6 or 7 weeks. This is pretty normal at that time of year. We might have a thunderstorm or whatever, but a lot of times we'll have extended period of dryness, just normal that time of year. Why does the stream keep flowing? And the stream keeps flowing because of discharge from groundwater. That's what we call the base flow of the stream. So this is why I think it's important, and we really need to stress to our community, when I'm getting base flows like this is telling me that my groundwater is low. The base flows in the stream, and therefore the base flow to the reservoir are low. and we need to really be paying attention to that. So this is a couple of the gauges that I watch on a daily basis. Always looking at the gauges. Obviously, I use these also when we're having storm events, so they're really, really important. And I'm putting a plug in for USGS. It's critical that we maintain these gauges, and as we move into some real tight budget cycles. Here you're seeing the graph for Greenwich, and the dotted. So let me just explain the graph. The green bar across the top is showing what the average filling is of the reservoir and where we would expect it to be. So at this time of year, we would expect the reservoir to be 88 to 90% full, and definitely, filling, once we get into April and May, we should be full. The dotted blue line, which you can kind of see jagged up, and then it continues into the summer months on the other side of the chart. Basically, you can see that we filled last year. The reservoir filled. We reached capacity. But then you can see, instead of following that green curve, which is the average, it just took a nosedive. And you can actually see that on the left side of the screen where it had to climb rapidly, and that's because we're not in just a one-year drought. We are actually entering a third-year drought. So you can see that so you can see the plotting of the system starting low in the fall, going up, filling by spring. It did finally fill, but then because one of the things that happens, and this is the understanding of base flow, is we can have the reservoir, they're designed to capture rainfall. So what happens is, in the spring, we get good rainfall, you get the capture of the water behind the dam, and we capture that surface water supply. That's what we need to do. But if you don't have good base flows, that's when you can have that, the drop-off, that quick, sharp drop-off in the level of reservoir, because once you don't have any rain, the reservoir levels are then sustained by base flow. So we need to understand that. The other thing that happens is, at that time of year, is demand significantly increases, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in detail. But once we get into the summer months, we really, change the demand in water, so you have this. So basically, last year we had the perfect storm going into a 2-year drought where we didn't have good base flow, and then we had excessive demand because it wasn't raining. And we'll talk a little bit about that. So one of the things we're looking at is, if you look again on the left-hand side, you're starting to see the reservoir levels climb, and that's the solid blue line that's going up. And it says that we're at 70%, and actually, I think the last graph I just saw that's a little bit more updated than this is we're at around 80%. That still is below where we should be. Like I said, we should be at 88 to 90%. So we're not where. So we are below where even last year. You can just see that blue line is hovering just a little bit above last year. And our concern is, here we are now going into a third year of a drought, and although we fully expect that with rainfall this spring that we will be full, we're very concerned that we're not going to be able to maintain that with base flows without really controlling demand. We're not going to be able to increase the supply, but we're going to be looking at demand. The other thing I want to just talk about this graph is really important, is that recovery is due in part to us, 1, reducing demand, and 2, increasing supply. Right now we're under an emergency order from the State Department of Public Health, and that allowed them to bring in more water from the Bridgeport system, which is a regional system. So we were able to have water coming into Stamford and then into Greenwich and not have to draw as much out of the reservoir because of that emergency supply. We are still under an order from the state. It's one of the reasons we're still going to be talking about water restrictions. However, once the state lifts that order, we will no longer be transferring water from the Bridgeport system. Well, let me take that back. We will no longer be transferring additional waters. We always transfer some waters. We established that in the 80s when we didn't have the pipe system in place. But they were able to put in an additional pipeline. Some of you may have seen it along the Merritt. There's a temporary pipeline around Merritt, and bring additional. That pipeline will be discontinued once that emergency order is lifted from the state. So I do want people to understand that this recovery in the reservoir is not just about precipitation, but it's about the residents of Greenwich, and Selectman Tessie indicated our residents did a great job reducing usage immediately, especially because of the outdoor usage, but continuing to operate throughout the winter, basically at a 20% reduction. We normally operate around 10 million gallons a day, and we were operating just around 8 million gallons a day throughout the year, throughout the winter, which is incredible. And that has all had an impact on the recovery. Our goal is to keep certain restrictions in place so that that recovery continues, and that we don't all of a sudden jeopardize and get back into the same situation we had last year. So just quickly, and I just want to back up on this. One of the things we're looking at, and part of the order for the Department of Public Health, that the Department of Public Health placed on Aquarion, is you can see these very steep lines. So those colored lines are the trigger points, and once the bars get below that, then we put on drought restrictions. And if you look on that right-hand side of the table, you can see that hashed blue line got down into those triggers, but they really didn't get into the triggers till October. And one of the things that the Department of Public Health looked at was, do we need to reset these triggers? So Aquarion is looking at setting the triggers. One of the things is, and as I show you the next graph, you'll see where they're a little bit more rounded and a little bit more flattened out for the Stanford system, and they were originally developed by two different organizations. Ours was developed by the Connecticut American Water Company, and the Stanford was operated under by a different company at the time. Everyone's now under the control of Aquarion. But that said, these trigger levels were established many years ago. They haven't changed in the 20 years that I've been here, and we're looking at, are these trigger levels reflective of both supply, knowing that we have changes in rainfall data, and also and rainfall patterns over the past 20 to 30 years, and also are they the right trigger levels based on demand and what's going on with our community. So similarly, you have the trigger levels with those colored lines. This is the Stanford system. The Stanford system, we were able to transfer water from Greenwich into from Stanford into the Greenwich reservoirs when we were down to a 50-day supply in September. And but they have the same thing. The only difference is if you look at, this is the Greater Bridgeport system. I didn't put in the Stanford system. Okay, so the Stanford system, just to let you know, their levels, they never reached capacity last year. And they do not expect the Stanford system to reach capacity this year, to get full. It's a little bit bigger, and like this Bridgeport system, it has a little bit flatter curves. But they are not expecting to be, it's going to be interesting to see what happens with this system. What I wanted to show you was, this is the Bridgeport system, and you can see again that hashed blue line, and then you can see the dark blue line starting. So the hashed blue line again was what happened in 2016. The dark blue line is showing what's happening, what's happened so far in 2017, and you can see reservoir levels, even in the Bridgeport system, are below where they should be. Now, again, we expect that the reservoirs will be full because we should get rain that will fill them up, but we are very concerned, on the back end. And since this is not, a major water supply, this is a key water supply for all of the region, the whole Bridgeport system, and it's something that we rely on. And one of the things going forward, we'll be looking at possibly making an increase to the permanent transfer of water from the Bridgeport system, which means we have to pay attention to making sure we're protecting this system as well. So this is, I think, probably the most telling slide. The blue bar is showing you a 10-year average rainfall. over 30 days, 90 days, 180 days, and 360 days, okay? And you can see the blue is showing the average, and then the red bar is basically showing what we actually had. And in every instance, the rainfall data is lower. A lot of people, we had some average rainfall in November, December, and January, but once we started getting into February and March, we are now seeing that we are running, over the past 3 months, again, a deficit. And for the year, 365 days, a 14-inch deficit in rainfall. And as I told you, if I went back further, we're into a third year of a drought. This is actually the third year we're seeing deficits in rainfall. And that's one of the things we're dealing with and why we're in this situation. So I think this is a really important graph to be looking at. It has to do with water demand, and I have to take your attention right to the top of the chart and way over on the left-hand side where you see the green and the blue line together. The blue is Stamford, the green is Greenwich, and then we've got some of the others, and I'll talk about the other colors, but let's just focus on Greenwich and Stamford. Last year, going into the drought, we had, you could see the blue and the green line were together. That is primarily, and using a lot of water, upwards of 20 million gallons a day. And there are times during when we had a really hot spell where just in Greenwich, we were averaging 32 million gallons a day coming out of the Greenwich system. And that's just not sustainable. That's one of the challenges we're talking about today. That is a jump from winter use. The average winter use is 10 to 12 million gallons a day, and we were jumping up to over 20 million on a general average day in the summer, and like I said, peaking at sometimes over 30 million gallons a day in the summer. Stamford has 120,000 people. Greenwich has 62,000 people, or 63,000 people, depending, it's like which census you're looking at right now. We obviously have an influence of people, an influx of people coming in to service business into our community. So we have a big daytime population, but so doesn't Stamford does as well. But when you really look at this is, and what happened, and this is what I think is so dramatic, is when we put on the outdoor water ban, the water in Greenwich dropped dramatically. So what you're seeing is then we've dropped the water dramatically, and then throughout the winter you had Bridgeport hovering 12 to 14 million gallons, or around, or I should say 12, and then down to 10, around 12 million gallons. Greenwich was able to drop our winter use, and again, looking at that, we were asking for 20% reduction, so that we continued to stay below our average use, which is around 10 million gallons a day in the winter, to 8 million gallons a day. So we put on the outdoor water ban, we asked people to conserve, and they did what they needed to do. But I think you really need to look at, we can operate at 8 million gallons a day, and then what a dramatic jump that is for outdoor water use in our community. And it's it's the same for all the communities. You can see the transfer from Greenwich to Suez. You can see the Darien water use. And you can see the New Canaan water use. And when we put the outdoor water ban, everything dropped. Those communities are just smaller, so we're looking at that. A lot of people ask about the transfer for Suez. Like I said, Suez is the water company that handles Rye Brook, Portchester. There's an agreement that has been in place. This was developed as a regional system when it was developed. And one of the things is that, although we like to call it the Greenwich system, I do need to remind people that we don't want New York all of a sudden putting a dam up and saying, well, we're going to take the water out of the Miamis. This is a regional system that encompasses multiple towns, both the source of the water and then where the water goes to. That said, when we put restrictions on, and the drought agreement we have with all the towns and Aquarion and parts of the water supply, is that when we're under restrictions, they're under restrictions. And sometimes because Connecticut has seen more of a drought, our state's being a little proactive right now. several years ago, actually Westchester County was in more of a drought, and Westchester had more restrictions than we did. So you'll see that because a lot of time, because we are dealing with different regions, and you'll see that. But generally, we'll really be looking at what needs to happen within this system and working with Aquarion. So what to expect this spring? Greenwich and the region will remain under a state order. So we're under state-ordered water supply emergency, and the new order was issued by the Connecticut Department of Public Health March 1st. That order will stay in place to March 31st, will then be evaluated, and what will happen at that time is, we'll take a look at all the charts I showed you and say, do we need to extend the order? Can we lift the order, and whatever. The order we were under until March 1st, and that was still under here in the town of Greenwich because we haven't lifted it, is that it was a complete outdoor water ban. You couldn't wash your cars, no power washing, whatever. Looking at the outdoor water use, and we did a lot of analysis of this over the winter, we really said, the main focus here is on outdoor irrigation, primarily irrigation of lawns. So what we're looking at is that instead of an outright ban on all outdoor water use, the focus of the order from the Department of Public Health, as well as the focus of the restrictions that I'm going to be presenting to the board, is at this time to ban outdoor irrigation, and that's focusing again on sprinkler type irrigation. We actually will be allowing drip irrigation, handheld hoses, soaker hoses, and I'll get into the details. But the idea is that we're going to maintain the ban on outdoor irrigation, keeping, as we're allowing our reservoirs to recover, but also allowing businesses. Understand that water restrictions really impact businesses. If you have a power washing business, that also now impacts the house painters. We know people are going to need to fill their pools. We know that people need to wash their cars after winter and they've got salt on them. So we're allowing certain things, and that's what we'll be recommending. The order from the Department of Public Health is to Aquarion, but it's then the responsibility of the towns to adopt their own ordinance, which we have done, and then implement the appropriate restrictions and we're looking at that order and then putting in restrictions that have to do, that basically work with that. What we're hoping will happen is that the reservoirs and our stream base flows will continue to improve, and that if that happens and we are at full, there's the potential that we will lift the outdoor ban, but then go to, instead of just a complete ban on outdoor irrigation, we will go to a 2-day per week watering restriction. And what we're looking is that happening, and it is being a permanent restriction in the 4 towns on outdoor watering, where you can only water your lawn twice a week. And to be honest with you, there's no reason for anyone to water their lawn more than twice a week. As a matter of fact, we will, Aquarion is going to be undertaking a study with UConn to say, in our part of the country, with the types of soils we have, do we need to do 2-day watering, or can we actually only need 1-day watering? And the interesting thing, and just a little anecdote, is many of you know that Bill Rutherford, the chairman of the Conservation Commission, is a landscape architect, and he said one of the main reasons that he has to do new plantings or gets called in to replace plants that have died is because of overwatering. So we're going to be, talking about that and moving forward on where we need to go. So, I'm just going to go through the restrictions here for you, what we've proposed. And does anybody have any questions about any of the graphs or charts or whatever so far? Okay, so the restrictions we're looking at putting in place is basically to lift the outdoor water ban and replace it with an outdoor water irrigation restrictions. That would be a mandatory ban on all outdoor irrigation by automatic irrigation systems and sprinkler type equipment. It will also be a mandatory ban on the watering of fairways at golf courses, and golf courses must limit their irrigation to tee areas and greens to be in compliance with the and to be in compliance with their drought management plans. This is important. The exceptions to the irrigation ban will be the use of drip irrigation, soaker hoses, and watering by hand. It will allow for the irrigation of nursery crops at commercial operations, and they should have a drought management plan in place. It will allow, and this is important, it will allow for the repairing and testing of new or existing automatic irrigation systems. What happens is, all of a sudden, if we lift the ban in May, the irrigation companies can't go out and test everybody's equipment at that time. So we are allowing them to do their normal work that they do in the spring. They start this time, just kind of like people service furnaces. You get your furnace serviced in August and September. Make sure it's ready for the winter season. So this is what we're allowing them to do: is go in, test the systems, get them ready, but they can't turn on the water until this ban is lifted. And again, that's going to be all weather dependent and where we are with water supply at that time. Last year, we found that there were folks who needed to do some work, and that we will allow trucking in water out from the outside as long as it is from an acceptable source that is not under the drought advisory. And if people are doing that, they need to make sure that they have a bill of sale showing where the origin of water is. Now, I kept this in there because I think it's important. To be honest with you, this was primarily used by people planting in the fall. It wasn't like people were trucking in water to irrigate the lawns per se. So I'm not sure we'll see that, but in the fall. But I thought it was important. So this trucking really here, because we're only banning outdoor irrigation, is important. As you can see, we're allowing for drip hoses, soaker hoses, and watering by hand. And when you're doing plantings, usually you can accomplish the watering for plantings in those methods. Couple of things. So this is primarily what the state requirements looked at. The town of Greenwich understands that there's some other challenges that we need to look at, and let me take it back. The state order was issued a little bit differently in terms of, they said, we're going to have an outdoor water ban. And then they listed like 20 exemptions. You can fill your pool, you can do this, you can do that. I was like, I can't even think of all the exemptions. We're not going that route. If you just want us to limit water irrigation, we're going to just write it that way, and that's how we wrote it. So theirs is written a little bit differently, but the whole purpose is, to limit outdoor water irrigation. But we will also be looking at no new water diversions or hookups are to be allowed to provide for outdoor or non-essential use. This includes the drilling of new irrigation wells. And so we really, want people to take a look at that and make sure they understand that. We think it's important that residents continue to conserve water and reduce water usage by 20%. And this includes making sure that all your plumbing and air conditioning systems that use water are in good repair. And when we put this in place last year, we had an actual outdoor water ban, so they shouldn't have had to practice good water conservation outside, because they should have had a water ban on. And so the idea was to focus on indoors, but we didn't just say indoors, we're saying all water use, because we still need people. If you're going to wash your car, don't leave your hose running. If don't wash your driveway with the hose, sweep it. So we're still asking people to reduce their overall water consumption, both indoor and out. Obviously, like I said, irrigation is banned, but there's other ways people are using outdoor water use, and we're asking them to reduce by 20%. The no drawing of water for transport by truck from any surface water supply except for emergency purposes, as determined by the Director of Health and the Fire Chief. The Fire Chief will continue. The Fire Department will continue to monitor our public land for fire hazards and possible park closures. and additional restrictions may be adopted as recommended by the Director of Health, Conservation, and the Fire Chief at any time. Obviously, the Director of Health has the ability to do anything in terms of to protect the public health. We would come back here with additional restrictions to have those put in place, but we want to make sure that this is in here so that people understand that this is where we are now. If we don't get more water, if we don't get that expected rainfall that we always get, April showers bringing May flowers type thing, if we do not get that rain, we may have to come back to you and put on further restrictions. What we're hoping is we're going to come back and have you reduce the restrictions. But we want to make sure that people understand that this is what's being allowed now, but that things can change. And then, as you know, I sent you a memo March 3rd. I've replaced it with the memo March 9th. Everything was the same in there except for 1.8. And we hadn't included this before, but it was our practice, and we've been doing this forever, and then I realized we probably should put it in our ordinance, in the restrictions that the Board of Selectmen is approving, that variance may be issued by the Conservation District in consultation with the Director of Health on limited basis to protect the environment and ensure community resiliency. And I'm just going to give you a couple of examples. We have construction, and we're not going to obviously halt all construction of homes, buildings or whatever. That opens up ground to erosion and whatever. We need to get lawn reestablished to protect the environment. So we would allow a variance on construction sites to get that lawn established to protect our wetlands and watercourses from erosion. Similarly, when we say ensure community resiliency, we did find that depending on what time of year it is, there could, all of a sudden we're not aware of a small business that really has a lot of work at a particular time of year, and we work with those businesses to practice best management practices, but we may allow them to use some water that, for whatever reason, may fall under this. An example would be, right now we're going to be allowing power washing, but we found that was a real challenge to totally restrict. So what we did was we granted a variance for some of the power washing, but we did it on a very limited basis and on when they could do that. And basically so that we weren't impacting businesses. And like I said, because the last thing we want to do is have a cascading effect from these restrictions on businesses. So we really want to work with the community, and this allows the health director and myself to do that. So if we need to put in some type of a variance process for making sure that we're doing good water conservation, but working with the community, this allows us to do that. So that's the one addition that was not in the memo previously. And we were doing that, and it's kind of inherent almost in all regulations when you put them in that there's the potential for variances, but I thought it was important that we codify them and put this in there. And because we did issue variance, again, for some of the reasons we talked about, we issued variances last year. So that's kind of where we are in terms of what, we're proposing that the Board of Selectmen do. Just want to mention a couple of other things that are going to be next steps for us. Obviously, the first selectman mentioned that outreach and education is a huge part of this. We're going to be working with both educating homeowners as well as the landscape community on what needs to be done. We already have a program focusing on soil health and leaf mulching and whatever, which provides for soil health, and that relationship between healthy soils is really important for maintaining green lawns and not being able to having to use as much water. We really, when you're talking about this, we need to institutionalize water conservation. And I'm saying that we can't just do water conservation when we're in a drought. We want to avoid the drought. We want to do mitigation. So the whole point of putting on, for example, the 2-day water restrictions, which will be permanent, is so that we don't all of a sudden have that real drop-off in that curve, and that we actually can have water by doing proper mitigation ahead of time and proper conservation measures ahead of time. And we really, again, need to institutionalize that, not as just an emergency response, but more water conservation is what we do every day. We have a task force with Aquarion and the other 3 communities. So it's Greenwich, Stamford, Darien, and New Canaan that are all under these restrictions. And we're working with them. And obviously with Aquarion in charge, there's a lot of discussion on the Aquarion system and what they're doing. But there was also a huge discussion, as Peter had indicated, on wells and what we need to do there. This has been a major focus of pushing at the water planning, the State Water Planning Council, and the water planning that's going on up there is saying, you know, you can't just focus on these public water supplies. You need to focus on private wells. And one of the things that I had recommended is relooking at our USGS study, and I will be contacting the folks who did that for us and saying, can we update that? It was done 2002 to 2004. Can we update that and include, our entire region? And so we'll be looking at how that could be done. Another thing that we've kind of put in place is, some of you know, there's a nexus between energy use and water use. The more water we use, the more energy we use, especially in our sewage treatment plant. But one of the things is that, and a lot of residents have pointed this out to me, is that, okay, I'm trying to reduce my indoor water use by 20%, but my water heater's over here and my bathroom is way over there, so I have to let that shower run a long time to get some hot water. And we're actually working with the Eversource, the electric utility, to see if we can develop some kind of an incentive program for putting in new water heaters close to the source. So that's not only a water-saving technique, but an energy-efficient technique. So we're looking to see how that will work out, and I've got that in the works. And then just lastly, we are looking at statewide legislation. We don't have any proposed for this year, but we're looking at 2 things. One is looking at putting a small surcharge on the water bills, similar to what is on your electric bill. On your electric bill, there's a very small surcharge, and all of that money has to be used for education and incentive programs, what they call the Energize Connecticut program. And all of that money has to be dedicated there. We're recommending, and it was actually pretty well received by the Water Planning Council. They've kind of, at this point, have put it into their plan. The plan is in draft form, so whether it comes out, but they've put that in to explore putting a surcharge in and having a dedicated fund for water conservation, statewide, and therefore every municipality won't have to do it by themselves, and basically modeled after the Energize Connecticut program, which I think really would go a long way to sustain a sustainable program. The other thing they're looking at is, right now, because of the order from the State Department of Public Health, we're looking at this 2-day restriction. We're looking to say, like, you know what? This isn't just about Greenwich, Stamford, Darien, and New Canaan. It's about all communities. Everyone has a big increase in water use because of lawns. So what do we need to do to, 1, educate people about lawns and the challenges with outdoor water use, and also, looking to see if we should put water restrictions, so basically limiting that outdoor irrigation to whether it be twice a week or once a week, depending on how the study out of Yukon comes. We'll see what that recommendation is. But that's something that we're looking to put in at the statewide, and we'll be talking to legislatures about that. So that's kind of my update. And what I'll do is, so that you don't have to bend your head to ask me, I'll come over to the other.
Denise, can you repeat that? I'm kidding. Denise.
Denise, thank you so much for providing a comprehensive
Well done.
report on the issue of water conservation, and also thank you for your active engagement on behalf of the town, with the state, with the region, and with my office, and all of us. I really appreciate it. As you so appropriately stated, today we're doing a couple things. The first is bringing into compliance with the regional action, state action, relaxation of the step 2 measure that we undertook sometime in late fall, early winter, if I recall.
Yeah, October.
And so we're going to formally take that action. At the same time, we're reaffirming, as you so well stated, the fact that we are requesting all of our residents to continue to conserve 20% of their water usage. That will primarily be in effect within the home, within the residence, and that it's applicable not only to Aquarian customers, but to those underground water sources.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can't stress enough that the restrictions in Greenwich apply, that we're putting on, apply
Across the board.
across the board. And one of the questions we have, even for Aquarion owners, is we have some people who have either a pond on their property or whatever. You can't use it for the outdoor irrigation. Whatever, if it's restricted here, it doesn't matter what the source is. It doesn't matter if it's a pond on your property. It doesn't matter if it's Aquarian supply. It doesn't matter if it's your well. You cannot operate that activity. And we need people to understand that because the water is all connected, as we said. And the other thing is that some of our surface waters are used for fire ponds. We don't want to, you impact other people when you do that, and we need to make sure people really understand that. And that's why we've kept in, not just talking about the irrigation, but the idea of diverting water, creating new wells. We made sure that those were all in place. They really should not be lifted this time until we know that the systems are fully recovered.
Great, thank you. So is there a motion at this time to adopt the revised restrictions pursuant to the memo dated March 9th, 2017? It's been moved by Mr. Toner, seconded by Mr. Marzullo. Discussion? Any comments, questions? If not, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Again, thank you, Denise, and as we continue to monitor this situation, we rely upon not only our residents, but the media, and Ken, this is going out. You can take this one to customers within the community. There's also going to be an active campaign that has mobile billboards running throughout the town, so if you happen to see a truck with something that looks like that on, don't get concerned. It's not political season. But it is reminding people that we have a situation they need to adhere to. So again, thank you very much. And
Yeah. And just one last thing. We talked about the education, and I had distributed, and I have some on the back table for anybody who wants to grab them. Water Smart Landscapes, we have such a focus on outdoor water use and how best to design and manage water on your property. I think it's a really great piece, and we're actually, Aquarion's looking at having this copied, so we'll have multiple, more to hand out to the landscape community and also to residents. But I just wanted to point out, it's one of the best pieces I've actually seen. And we do have a limited number of copies on the back table for folks interested. Thank you.
great, thank you. Yeah, this is extremely helpful and coming at the appropriate time as people begin to think spring and planting. So again, thank you. The next item on our agenda under new business is a request for a partial road closure for an event called Greenwich Cars and Coffee. And we want to thank these gentlemen for their abundance of patience now that it's 12:02 and we started at 10 to sit through some very important topics. But again, welcome. The floor is yours to explain to us your undertaking and initiative and request.
Thank you very much for Selectman Tessie. I do have some copies here of the requests.
Oh, great, thanks. And to introduce Sebastian, this is Sebastian Dotzman from Seabass Entertainment.
Yes. So I'm here representing Greenwich Cars and Coffee, and the request is to shut down Greenwich Avenue from Amadrone Crossway to Lewis Street on select Sundays, which are April 30th, June 18th, August 6th, and October 15th from 8 to 10 a.m. to put together and create a informal and kind of a amateur car show, car meet, which has been recently hosted in the fall and in the winter in front of CFCF Coffee Cafe Roasters. And the reason for our request to shut down Greenwich Avenue on that block is to allow for all of the cars to park and then for spectators and attendees to freely walk up and down Greenwich Avenue and in between the cars without causing any safety issues or hazards, and making it a more enjoyable event for everyone. In the packet that I just gave you guys, there's also a correspondence with Lieutenant Sluzars from the Greenwich Police Department on his recommendations for the closure and the requirements that GPD would have for detours to alleviate traffic congestion in the area. So that's pretty much it.
Do you have any questions? I would just commend you. It's a wonderful activity. I had been down in Naples, Florida on a couple of occasions. It just coincided where they do classic car shows in their downtown on 5th Street, which is like our Greenwich Avenue. But it's a really nice opportunity for those who are car aficionados to not only show their cars, but also look at them, which is, in many ways, they're works of art if you look at some of the more classic older cars. So I'm wholeheartedly in support of your endeavor. Does anyone have any questions or comments? With that being said, is there a motion to approve the request to have the limited road closure from Amagerone Crossway to Lewis Street on the proposed dates of April 30th, June 18th, August 6th, October 15th from 8 to 10?
Seconded.
It's been moved in second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you very much. That was
Thanks again for your patience.
2 minutes, 2.5 hours
It's
for
a
2
great
minutes.
virtue, patience, believe me,
That's
but
You're gonna know about
You learn-
water, school boards, and cars.
perhaps,
We won't wash any cars on that.
perhaps you were inspired to run for the Board of Education.
There you go.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, so moving to item number 6 on the agenda, it is
We're getting ready.
a regular item on the agenda, which is to make nominations or appointments to various boards and commissions. At our last meeting, I believe we enumerated, we had somewhere in the vicinity of 10 nominations to complete. Some of them were pending the acceptance of the information, confirmation of people's backgrounds, resumes. In the interim, I just want to report, I think I copied you both on, I received a notice on February 28th from George Yankowicz that he would be stepping down from the Board of Commissioners of the Housing Authority of the Town of Greenwich. George has served on the Board of the Housing Authority for close to 12 years, and most recently had indicated when his term came up in 2014 that he was likely not to finish the term because of other pursuits. He did stay on to assist in the presentation of several applications for redevelopment, and at this time indicates he is transitioning. So that does create an opening on the board. So we thank George first and foremost for his extraordinary service as a housing commissioner, and thank not only him for his service to the town, but to the residents of public housing who rely upon the Board of Commissioners to really act as their fiduciary in ensuring that there's safe and a healthy living environment for all residents of public housing, those run by the Housing Authority and those who are Section 8 housing, which is private units subsidized for public or for individuals. So thank you, George, for your service to Greenwich, and wish you very best in your future endeavors.
Thank you, George. Good guy.
So, Mr. Toner, you have been a point person on nominations with the Nominations Advisory Committee, do you have any nominations you'd like to make today?
Yep. Commission on Aging, we have 2 openings. Or is it 3? 2. I'd like to nominate Anne Marie Hines to the Commission on Aging. These are 3-year terms, so she would be taking Kate Brennan's spot, so that would be,
19, right?
sorry,
Just looking down at the sheet, the date of her term would be
317, so that goes out to
2020.
320.
Great. So Mr. Toner is moving the nomination of Anne Marie Hines, a resident of Meadow Road in Riverside, to the Commission on Aging for a term expiring 3/31/20. Is there a second?
There is.
Seconded by Mr. Marzullo. By way of background, Ms. Hines is a graduate of Pace University School of Law. She has a Master's of Science from the Polytechnic NYU University, a Bachelor of Arts from the College of New Rochelle. She has volunteered as an attorney for the Westchester Family Court in the area of domestic violence. She worked for the Pace Women's Justice Center, and the nature of her business is she works for this nonprofit legal organizations for women issues, divorce, abuse issues, elder law. She is involved in the Greenwich Choral Society, GADC River House, volunteer ministry at Parsonage Cottage, and has been a member of the Parent School Societies for Greenwich Academy and the Convent of the Sacred Heart. I think her skills will be well served on the Commission on Aging, particularly in the area of elder law, which is so critically important to people as they progress through the life cycle and need assistance in dealing with a plethora of issues. So thank you for making the nomination. And second, all those in favor? Aye. Okay, is there another nomination?
Yes, to the Commission on Aging, Dr. Ellen Wolfson. That would be for the same term to 3/20. Dr. Wolfson has practiced medicine in Greenwich for 31 years. She retired in 2015. She has an MD from NYU School of Medicine, and she's board certified by ABIM in internal medicine. Has been very involved with the elderly, and she has expressed an interest in this commission.
Great. I know her well.
There's
She's a great lady.
I know her well.
A motion made by Mr. Toner to appoint, or nominate, I should say, Dr. Wolfson to the Commission on Aging for a term expiring 3/31/20. Is there a second?
There is.
You have anything to say?
No, just I know her well. I think great.
Okay.
Great pick.
All those in favor of that nomination signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Great. Looking down at the next boards, I see under the Board of Ethics, we had a renomination, and I believe it was confirmed he is interested in continuing to serve, and that was Rob Siska. Is there a motion to renominate Rob Siska for a term expiring 3/31/20?
So
Seconded.
It's been moved and seconded. Discussion? Just by way of background, Rob runs his own law office here in the town of Greenwich. He previously served as a member of the Greenwich Inland Wetlands and Watercourses Agency from 2007 to 2010, and has volunteered with the United Way fundraising. All those in favor of nominating Rob Siska signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Next on the list, is the Board of Social Services. I believe we had previously discussed, and we were waiting for confirmation of affiliation as a voter, and that has occurred. The nomination of Annalisa Fernandez to serve on the Board of Social Services. By way of background, she attended Georgetown University, graduated cum laude 1989. She owns a small business. She is a freelance interpreter, published author, and mother of school-aged children, as she states in her resume. And she has served as an AmeriCares volunteer interpreter, and currently is working with the National Language Services Corps. So I'm happy to move the nomination of Annalisa Nash Fernandez to the Board of Social Services for a term expiring 3/31/20.
I'll second that.
It's been seconded by Mr. Marzullo. Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
How about snack?
Miss, looking, we have the housing is an appointment, but you want to see Vin? Do you know Vin? Vin DeFina? Do you
Yeah.
know him? Or do you want to move to appoint him today?
I'd like to.
Meet him?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's fine.
Okay, let's go back. Where are we? When's the next meeting of the board? Selectmen. We're having the special meeting,
It would be March the 23rd, 2 weeks from today.
so it would be after the submission date for the April call,
which is
so,
March 17th.
I mean, we still have several positions for which I do not believe SNAC has ascertained candidates, but let me look under what Mr. Crumpine sent us.
Did you ever get anything for Cynthia Eminger for Shellfish Commission?
We had a nice thing to. We took up that in the beginning.
I know.
Oh, you did?
But when you're done, I'll.
Okay.
Second them all.
So their motion is to reappoint the following three individuals to the Selectmen's Nomination Advisory Committee for terms that will expire in June of 2020. And the names are Emily Sternberg, Richard Shapiro, and Rita Baker. You moved, so Mr. Marzullo moved. You seconded. All in favor? Aye.
And do you know Russ?
I believe I'd have to refresh my memory,
Yeah, okay, because I'm going to call.
so
Are you taking an official vote on Mr. DeFino?
not at this time.
Okay.
Okay, that concludes, sure.
Thank you.
That concludes our appointments and nominations. We have with us today, just circling back to the earlier part of our agenda, an esteemed member of our town government, Ms. Jill Oberliner from the Board of Estimate and Taxation, and she had requested a brief moment to make comment. So welcome. Because you were busy at your meeting, I know, early this morning.
So sorry, I'm sorry I missed your statement, but I'm just here to thank you personally on behalf of myself and all of your constituents, all three of you, for speaking out publicly against race and bias, and particularly anti-Semitism. As you know, your leadership sets the standard for all of us in town, and we're also appreciative of your comments. So thank you, and I urge Ken to publish it above the line, front page.
Even if it were that simple.
He rolled his eyes at me.
I'm not rolling my eyes, I just don't have the power.
But really, thank you.
You're very
It does make a
welcome.
difference.
For reaching
You're
out
very-
to us.
Yes,
Thank you for reaching
thank
out
you,
to
and
us.
thank you for taking the time to remain to express that sentiment. We really appreciate it.
Really, it's, I've heard from a number of people, very grateful of your remarks, so
And for all you do for the town.
Yeah,
thank you, as
thank
to you as well.
Thanks.
Thanks, Jill.
See, we set the standard here.
You do, I quoted.
All of us, all of us.
Quoted that.
As I said, if Greenwich could set the standard for the state and the country, we'd be a much more,
Better place.
yeah, exactly.
Oh, yeah, I got the copies for that.
That concludes appointments and nominations. We do have executive session scheduled. On that executive session, we have pending workers' comp claims, pending tax appeals, and pending litigation. At this time, I would request a motion to go into executive session for those purposes, and the time being 12:21.